That woman's hiding something. The words hissed like venom through the thick summer heat. 2 phones were already out. Cameras were rolling. And in less than 5 minutes, a simple grocery run would become a viral firestorm. The blazing afternoon sun cast long shadows across the jam-packed parking lot of Brookline Plaza, where ex-Staff Sergeant Tessa Kane, 46, eased her navy blue SUV into a designated Wounded Warrior parking spot, her special permit hanging clear as day from the mirror. After surviving a brutal landmine explosion during her final deployment to Afghanistan in 2008, an attack that claimed her right leg below the knee. This small allowance was one of the few reminders left that someone, somewhere, still remembered her sacrifice. Discharged honorably in 2010, after more than a decade of service, multiple surgeries, and excruciating rehab, Tessa had fought tooth and nail to reclaim fragments of her independence. Still, public spaces triggered a tightness in her chest. She hated the unsolicited glances, the whispered suspicions, and in worse days the verbal ambushes. But she needed milk. And her physical therapist, ever the drill sergeant in yoga pants, had pushed her to resume solo outings despite the cruel nerve pain that clung like fog to her every step. As Tessa turned in her seat and lifted her prosthetic gently out of the car, her instincts prickled. She was being watched. 5 bikers, all wearing black denim cuts, patched with slogans like "Born to Bleed" and "Semper Fi for Life," lounged near a row of gleaming motorcycles. Their laughter, rough and performative, crept toward her like oil on water. "Hey, princess," bellowed the biggest one, a broad man with sun-leathered skin and a thick, smoke-stained beard. "That spot's for real warriors." Tessa's spine stiffened. She'd faced down Taliban ambushes with less irritation. She'd heard versions of this sneer before, but that didn't mean it burned any less. "Probably married a vet and jacked his plate," another chimed in, chewing a toothpick like it owed him rent. "My sister's Navy. She says women don't even get near combat." A few shoppers slowed their pace. Some glanced toward the commotion. Others merely avoided eye contact. 1 or 2 even chuckled. Not one person spoke up. Tessa reached across for her polished oak cane, steadying herself as she rose. The sleek, graphite fiber prosthetic gleamed beneath her khaki shorts, every detail engineered for balance and strength, yet it still never felt like her own. Her limp, while managed with training, still echoed in every step, but she held herself tall. Decades of training told her never to give an enemy the win. That leg had been replaced 3 times since the blast, each new version more precise but still foreign. She ignored the jeers as she pulled on her grip-lined gloves, designed to reduce strain on her wrists. Her silence emboldened the hecklers. "Bet she got that leg off eBay," another one scoffed. "Everything's fake these days, legs, nails, honor." More chuckles, more phones raised. Still no interference from the crowd. With her jaw set and a familiar fire tightening her stomach, Tessa shut her car door and slung her tote bag across her shoulder. She walked with determination toward the automatic glass doors, each step rhythmic and deliberate. "I didn't crawl out of that crater in Kandahar just to explain my damn self in a supermarket lot," she whispered, too low for anyone to hear. Every footstep away from them felt like swallowing broken glass. But she'd learned the hard way. Picking every fight came at a cost. "Walk away," her therapist had urged. "Not every fight deserves your scars." But as she passed a lanky teenager in an olive hoodie, his eyes darted up from his phone. He'd been recording. He looked away quickly. Inside, Tessa forced herself to focus. Bread, almond milk, protein bars. Safe, mindless tasks to drown out the tension fizzing in her veins. Her hands, though, betrayed her shaking faintly as she reached for a carton of eggs. The harsh ceiling lights flickered off the linoleum like camera flashes, jabbing at the throbbing in her skull, a lovely leftover from the blast that had also left her with mild traumatic brain injury. Physical pain she could grit through, but the flashbacks, those came like ghosts. Blood, fire, screams folded into the dust. She paused by the cereal aisle, leaning hard on her cane as the scent of motor oil and metal crept into her memory. "You okay, ma'am?" a young store employee asked gently, noticing the sudden stillness in her eyes. "Just a headache," Tessa answered with a practiced grin she reserved for the well-meaning and unknowing. She powered through the rest of her list with mechanical precision. Moving gave her back control. The weight of the grocery basket dragged against her shoulder, but she refused every offer of help. She'd spent too many nights helpless in a hospital bed to accept pity. Outside, 20 minutes later, her pulse quickened. The men had moved. Now only 10 feet from her SUV, sprawled across the hood of a nearby sedan like vultures. Their eyes followed her every step. The youngest, stinked from wrist to neck in tribal lines, was holding up his phone. "Got her," he said, smirking. "Perfect shot for the squad page." He showed his screen to the others, who roared. The caption was already typed. "Fraud alert. Fake wounded vet stealing Valor at Brookline Plaza." Tessa's gut twisted. She knew these types, keyboard commandos with hero complexes, always hungry for a witch to burn. Her face would be viral within the hour. She clenched her jaw. "Get to the car," she told herself. Same as a hot zone evac. Eyes up, no hesitation. But just before she reached the handle, a figure blocked her path. A mall security guard, tall, thin, with the nervous energy of a man doing his best not to sweat through polyester. His badge read, C. Wallace, and he looked barely old enough to rent a car. "Ma'am," he said, not quite making eye contact, "we've had a report of unauthorized use of the veteran parking spot." Behind him, the bikers grinned like wolves. The bearded leader gave her a slow, theatrical salute, prompting fresh laughter from the others. "I have documentation," Tessa said, voice low and steady. She reached into her purse, fingers finding the worn ID case that held her military credentials beside her driver's license. "Those tags? Anyone with a credit card and a Wi-Fi signal can get one of the bikers shouted, loud enough for the entire row of parked cars to hear. "My cousin works for Veterans Affairs. Says female vets are draining resources from the guys who actually did the dirty work." The mall security officer, still visibly unsure, adjusted his badge and took a breath. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see a bit more than just a tag. Some kind of proof, military ID, discharge forms, anything official." Tessa Kane felt her cheeks blaze as the crowd thickened around the unfolding spectacle. She retrieved her military ID card with precise hands and handed it over. The guard examined it like it might explode, eyes squinting with theatrical scrutiny. "Says U.S. Marine Corps," he muttered, then raised a brow. "But your license plate frame says Army." "A gift from a friend," she answered, keeping her tone even though her pulse was climbing. "I served 11 years. 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines. 2 tours in Iraq. 1 in Afghanistan." She could practically hear the bikers exaggerating their smirks behind the guard's back, miming disbelief like middle school bullies. "Might be best to call the VA," the guard suggested awkwardly, returning the ID. Nearby, an elderly woman paused, her cartwheels creaking as she observed the growing tension. Tessa thought she might intervene, but the woman glanced at the bikers, winced, and hurried past, her gaze glued to the pavement. "It's fine," Tessa said quietly. "I've been questioned before. I'm used to being erased." The security guard's face crinkled with discomfort, but he said nothing. "Well, these gentlemen said—" "These gentlemen," Tessa cut in, her voice low but sharp, "are wrong." She inhaled slowly. "But I know you're just trying to do your job." At the far edge of the parking lot, the young man in the gray hoodie, who had been filming quietly, stepped behind a parked SUV and quickly made a call. Tessa caught only fragments of his words as he paced, "Staff Sergeant Kane. No, sir. This is bad. They're disrespecting a decorated Marine." His voice was low and fast, urgent. Then he turned and disappeared into the mall. Back at her van, the security guard finally stepped aside after closely inspecting the Purple Heart license plate bolted to her bumper. Tessa slid into the driver's seat and exhaled shakily. From her glove box, she pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside lay her bronze star, the engraved edge still razor-sharp in the sunlight. She stared at it, a moment their own silent anchor. That metal had come at a price. 3 brothers, in arms dead in the desert, and her leg torn away in the firestorm. She wrapped it gently in tissue and placed it on the passenger seat. Some days, she needed to physically see the proof of who she was not, who strangers decided she was. Outside her windshield, the bikers had returned to their motorcycles, still laughing. still gesturing toward her vehicle like teenagers at recess. As she prepared to reverse out, she noticed the security officer had already wandered off. New target, new problem. What had just unfolded was already fading into the mundane buzz of the day. No one had stepped up. Not the shoppers. Not the other vets who were undoubtedly somewhere in the crowd. Not even the mall's own security. It was a familiar silence. The kind she'd known all too well: recovery wards, sterile hospital nights, the quiet drip of morphine, the questions she'd asked the ceiling when the pain wouldn't let her sleep. Did any of it matter? Had her sacrifice been currency spent in a world that no longer paid attention? If you've ever felt erased, left to fight battles no one else sees, type "alone" in the comments. You're not the only one. 30 minutes later, the same group of bikers lounged outside the coffee shop, now seated in aluminum patio chairs near the cafe's sliding glass doors. Cigarette smoke wafted upward as they chuckled over their phones. Screens were passed around. One of them, the tall one with the dirty bandana, held up his screen and cackled, "Already got 50 comments, bro." People are livid, sick of these fake-ass vets stealing Valor and parking spots. Another, younger with a scalp shaved to a shine, leaned in. "You gotta read what they're saying about female Marines. Savage." The parking lot pulsed with weekend traffic. Life at the mall had resumed its rhythm, uninterrupted. No one noticed the faint growl of engines until it rose above the hum. Not normal sedans or soccer vans. Noir was different. Controlled, intentional. 4 olive-drab Jeeps rolled in, spotless and silent except for the low thunder of their engines. They moved in tight formation, like a synchronized drill team in steel. Shoppers paused, eyes narrowing. Phones reappeared. The convoy halted in a perfect line in front of the mall's primary entrance, blocking the central drive lane entirely. From each Jeep stepped 2 Marines, full-dress blues, ribbons glittering, gloves like fresh snow. Their posture was pure disciplinino slouching, no sideways glances. They weren't there to be polite. They were there for presence, authority, justice. These weren't parade players. Their uniforms bore the truth-scarred leather belts, earned brass, ribbons that whispered combat. They moved with fluid command, forming a solid rank facing the cafe. The bikers slowly stopped laughing. One stood, another shifted his weight uneasily. Mallgoers froze in place, some whispering. Children pointed. An eerie hush settled. The lead Marine, a master sergeant with iron-gray hair and 2 full rows of service ribbons, stepped forward. His voice didn't shout. It commanded. "Staff Sergeant Tessa Kane," he said, his deep voice cutting across the air. "United States Marine Corps, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart recipient, 11 years of honorable service, wounded in active combat while rescuing fellow Marines." He scanned the crowd and locked eyes with the biker crew. "You disgraced her today." The silence deepened. One biker cleared his throat. Another shifted from foot to foot, eyes dropping. The pack, once so smug and vocal, began to crumble under the relentless, silent gaze of 8 warriors who had seen real fire. Staff Sergeant Kane lost her leg pulling Corporal Elijah Hart from a burning Humvee during a sustained mortar attack. Detonation, just outside Ramadi, 2008, the Master Sergeant continued, his tone unwavering, a calm storm of restrained power. Despite the injury, she went back into the vehicle. Not once, twice. She pulled 2 more Marines out before the transport exploded. His voice never wavered, but its gravity carried through every corner of the now silent plaza. "She doesn't talk about that day, but we do." A younger Marine, his captain's bars gleaming in the sunlight, stepped forward to stand at attention. Staff Sergeant Tessa Kane was the senior NCO in a convoy that was ambushed by insurgents using a complex IED and small arms crossfire. Despite her injury, she coordinated the squad's defense, held comms with QRF under active fire, and ensured every wounded Marine was stabilized before she accepted medical attention for herself. From one of the olive Jeeps, a familiar figure stepped out. The young man in the gray hoodie, his hood now down, his hair freshly cropped in regulation style. His face was focused and resolute. He marched over to the formation and took his place beside the Master Sergeant. I served under Staff Sergeant Kane in Iraq, he announced. His voice didn't shake. And when I saw how you treated her, I made a call. These Marines drove over 2 hours. They didn't hesitate. At the mall's main entrance, the security guard Wallace appeared, blinking at the formation like it might vanish if he looked away. One of the Marines, a captain with a rigid bearing, strode toward him. "Sir," he began crisply, "we understand you questioned the identity of Staff Sergeant Tessa Kane earlier today." The guard blinked. There was a complaint. She received the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor, 3 Purple Hearts. She completed water survival instructor school as the only female in her class, the captain continued. His tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. Each word hit like a gavel. She earned every honor this country offers its wounded warriors. The crowd had grown now, thick around the edges of the lot. Mall staff stood in doorways, frozen. Curious shoppers formed a loose, respectful semicircle. An older man in a Korean war cap stood tall, lifting a trembling salute. The bikers, once loud and brash, sat quietly, now faces tight, unsure, deflated under the 8 unyielding stares of combat veterans. And then, from the last jeep, a 9th figure emerged. It was Tessa. Contacted earlier by her former subordinate, she had returned uninvited, unannounced. She walked slowly toward the gathered Marines, her cane tapping out a steady beat against the asphalt. Every step was deliberate, echoing the cost she paid daily to simply walk. No uniform now, just a pair of jeans and a plain blue shirt, but her posture said everything. Her dignity wasn't stitched into fabricid, was trained, earned, and survived. Her face, aged not just by time but by hardship, was calm, collected, eyes laser sharp. As she reached the group, all 8 Marines snapped to attention and saluted in flawless unison. The crowd hushed even further, reverent. For a moment, even the wind seemed to still. Tessa returned the salute, hand crisp, movement perfect. And then the Master Sergeant spoke again, this time, turning directly to the bikers. "Stand up." A long, brittle pause. Then, slowly, hesitantly, the 5 bikers stood. Apologized to Staff Sergeant Kane. The tall one, who had worn a mocking grin earlier, now couldn't meet her gaze. "Ma'am," he said, voice scraping against the lump in his throat. I apologize. For my disrespect, I was wrong." One by one, the others followed, muttering their apologies with downcast eyes. Tessa said nothing for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her bronze star, still wrapped in tissue. She held it out not as a trophy, but as a symbol. "This medal?" she said, her voice firm and echoing across the parking lot. "This isn't mine. It belongs to Corporal Elijah Hart. He didn't make it home." Her eyes swept over the crowd. "None of us who do come back whole. Some of our wounds are visible." She gently tapped her prosthetic. "Some are not." She turned to face the bikers directly. "I don't need your apology. What I need is for the next time you see someone with a disabled vet plate, or a limp, or a look you don't understand, you remember this moment. Because not all scars are worn on skin. And not every hero wears the face you expect." The transformation in the plaza was instant. The bikers stood like penitents. The security guard removed his cap, his face pale. "Ma'am," he said, his voice roughened by guilt. I'm sorry for questioning your service. There's no excuse. I should have known better." Tessa looked at him soft, but steady. "You were doing your job based on what you were told," she replied. "You acted on information, not malice, I understand." People began to break formation, but not before several approached Tessa directly. A man in a wheelchair, with Vietnam etched into his expression, rolled over and clasped her hand. "Thank you for keeping the chain going," he whispered. Decades and wars apart, their pain formed an unspoken pact. A young mother approached, her daughter, maybe 7, clutching a toy Marine doll. "My daughter says she wants to be a Marine one day," the woman said, her voice trembling. "And I think she just met her hero." Tessa bent slowly, joints stiff, eyes kind. "If you choose to serve," she told the little girl, Do it because you believe in something bigger than yourself. That's what gets you through the days when everything hurts. The Marines began filing back toward their vehicles, formation breaking. Mission complete. But before they left, the Master Sergeant stepped to Tessa once more. "You never had to salute me," she said quietly. "Just promise me next time you see someone being laughed at, don't let it go." He nodded, jaw tight. "We take care of our own, Staff Sergeant Kane. Always have. Always will." As they turned to go, the biker in the bandana stepped forward again, this time Aloneno gang behind him. "I wasn't ever in the military," he said, voice subdued. "But I see now. That doesn't mean I understand nothing. My dad served in Vietnam. Came back. Different," the biker said quietly. No more swagger in his stance. "I guess I've been carrying that anger around ever since." Tessa nodded slowly. "Most of us come back different," she replied. "Some changes, you see, some stay buried." He looked down at his phone. "I deleted the post," he said, showing her the screen. "Replaced it with an apology. Told people I was wrong." Tessa didn't respond right away. Then, after a long moment, she gave a single, slight nod. "That's worth something." As she turned to leave, the security guard reappeared, this time flanked by a well-dressed man with a name tag that read, "Mall Director Alan Vickers." "Ma'am," the manager said, adjusting his glasses nervously, "we'd like to do something in your honor if you'll allow it." Tessa just looked at him, curious but reserved. The next morning, when she arrived for her physical therapy appointment at the VA, her therapist greeted her with wide eyes. "Kane," he said, nearly dropping his clipboard. "You're everywhere online right now." He handed her his phone. The video had gone viral, thousands of shares, hundreds of thousands of views. The image of 8 Marines standing in silent formation in a shopping mall lot had caught fire. "Marine honor in action. My faith in humanity is restored. I'm bawling. My sister's a female vet and goes through this. This is what standing up looks like." When Tessa returned to Brookline Plaza 3 days later for her usual grocery run, she parked in her regular space but stopped short when she saw the new sign. A brass plaque, freshly installed and gleaming in the morning sun. "Reserved for Staff Sergeant Tessa Kane, USMC, with gratitude for your service." As she stepped out of her SUV, a young boy approached, holding a crayon drawing of a Marine in uniform, the figure smiling with a prosthetic leg. "My dad's a soldier," the boy said shyly, handing her the paper. "He says you're the bravest person he's ever heard of." Tessa crouched slowly, her knee locking stiffly, but she managed. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the artwork. "But remember, there are many brave people who serve. Some never get recognized at all." The boy's father stepped forward, eyes full. He extended a hand. "I've been trying to explain courage to my son. Now I'll just tell him about you." Over the weeks that followed, messages began arriving. Dozens, then hundreds. Veterans from all over the country reached out after seeing the video, emails, letters, social posts. Many shared their own stories of being doubted, ridiculed, dismissed, of walking through the world unseen because they didn't match the image someone expected. The local elementary school, which had never hosted a female combat veteran, invited Tessa to speak at their upcoming Veterans Day assembly. She'd declined invitations like that before, never comfortable being put on display. But this time, she accepted. Standing in front of 200 children and parents, she didn't talk about battlefield heroics or the loss of her leg. She spoke about the other battles, the everyday ones, learning how to walk again, fighting phantom pain, finding her identity again after the uniform came off. "The hardest part of being a veteran," she said, "isn't what happened during combat. It's returning to a world that doesn't always see what you've given up." The impact of the confrontation rippled out across the town. The local VA office launched an awareness campaign focusing on invisible wounds, PTSD, brain injuries, survivor's guilt. The shopping center issued new guidelines for all staff: how to approach veterans with dignity, not doubt. Rick the biker with a bandana reached out to Tessa through the VA. They met at a local event, where he sheepishly admitted, "I started volunteering with a vets support group. My dad never talked about what he went through, but I think I get it a little more now. I want to help someone else before it's too late." 6 months after the incident, Tessa Kane stood at her bedroom dresser, holding the small velvet box that had long been her private reassurance on bad days. She gently folded the bronze star back inside. For years, it had been her silent answer to every doubter, every sideways look, a reminder that she mattered. But now, she no longer needed it sitting out to prove anything. For the first time since returning home, she felt seen, not as a symbol, not as a sob story, not even as a hero. Just as a veteran who had served with honor, real courage doesn't always arrive in sound and fury. Sometimes, it's quiet. It walks with a limp. It gets stared at. It doesn't demand recognition, but it deserves it. In a world that often overlooks quiet strength, sometimes it takes a few others to stand up and say, "You're not invisible. Not today." Tessa's story isn't just about a parking lot confrontation. It's about the thousands of veterans walking through grocery stores, waiting in hospital lobbies, navigating a world that doesn't always understand the weight they carry. The Marines who came that day didn't just defend one woman. They reminded an entire town and beyond what respect looks like, what honor means, and what a real warrior is. For Tessa, the validation wasn't about vindication. It was about visibility, being acknowledged not for what she had lost, but for what she gave. And perhaps that's all most veterans truly want, not parades, not medals, just a quiet thank you, a sign that says, "We see you, we remember." Ever witness someone dismissed or disrespected because they didn't look like a hero? Share their story. Subscribe to us where silence is broken by truth and honor still stands tall.